Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Kjetil Moisinius Larsen, and I guess I'm here in two capacities. One is that I was invited by the NGO ULOBA to present this draft law on supported decision-making that I authored for ULOBA a little while ago. But I was also a member of the National Commission in Norway that considered incorporation of the CRPD into Norwegian law, and we completed our report in January last year. So I'm also here in that capacity, I think. First of all, it was very interesting to hear about the Finnish new law, because I think what you have then managed to achieve in Finland is very much what we set out to do with this exercise in Norway. Only difference being we haven't yet been successful in coming as far as we have in Finland. It was very useful to hear about your experiences. But the context here is basically that the Norwegian Guardianship Act, as we call it, from 2010 permits the creation of guardianship and also deprivation of legal capacity in certain situations. Call it as a measure of last resort, even if that isn't written into the Act. The current Act does not prohibit substituted decision-making. It allows for deprivation of legal capacity. When the Act was adopted in 2010, it was assumed to be in compliance with the CRPD. Since then, many developments have shown that perhaps the Act isn't entirely in compliance with the CRPD, and several developments have then taken place in Norwegian government and in Norwegian legislative system. Important in this context, in 2021, the Norwegian Parliament instructed the government to conduct a so-called holistic review of the Guardianship Act with an express aim to increase the emphasis on supported decision-making in the Act. There are also several other relevant processes, but for that I can refer mainly to Ms. Bjørshol's presentation earlier today, such as the ongoing process of incorporation of the CRPD, which will obviously have an impact on these issues. Turning to the Guardianship Act specifically, the Act was amended quite substantially in 2023 with an express aim to strengthen, again, the emphasis on supported decision-making. It was expressed at that time that guardianship should be, must be a voluntary support measure. And it was emphasized that a guardian should make decisions based on the interests and the wishes of the person under guardianship. But importantly, the Act still allows for deprivation of legal capacity, and it remains a challenge that the Act allows guardians to make decisions for a person, not necessarily with a person. New amendments have been proposed recently, as late as in November last year, where the deadline for making comments is actually the day after tomorrow, where the government proposes amendments that will emphasize the role of a guardian as an advisor for the person under guardianship and also as a representative for that person. But still, the possibility to deprive someone of their legal capacity remains in the Guardianship Act. But during this holistic review of the Guardianship Act, the Norwegian civil society is invited into continuous dialogue with the government, and ULOBA, as a non-governmental organization in Norway, is a part of this ongoing dialogue. And ULOBA started up a long-term project on supported decision-making in 2016, establishing so-called micro boards for supported decision-making somewhat within the framework of the existing Norwegian legislation, but trying to then develop a structure to allow for supported decision-making without creating guardianships. That project ended in 2023, but as part of that project, they commissioned me in 2022 to prepare a sketch of a possible act on supported decision-making. So this draft legislation is a private, non-governmental initiative. It has not been followed up by the government, explicitly at least, but we can hope that it has inspired or influenced the other ongoing processes. But there was at that time, back in 2022, indications from the Norwegian government that it would consider proposing temporary rules to allow for a trial period with supported decision-making in lieu of the establishment of guardianships. What I wanted to do with the few minutes I have is to simply provide an overview of that sketch, where I would have hoped at that time that I had known about the current Finnish legislation, because that would have made an even better proposal. At the time, back in 2022, I drew inspiration from the legislation we knew about at that time, particularly Costa Rica and Peru, trying to adapt that into a Norwegian or Nordic context. The draft act that we proposed had the 15 sections that you see on your screen, trying to build a coherent and comprehensive law on supported decision-making. Section 1 purpose would simply be based on CRPD Article 12, stating that everybody has the right to enjoy their legal capacity on an equal basis with others, based simply on Article 12. The CRPD, highlighting the right to independence of all persons. Section 2 is a more Norwegian necessity, based on tendency in Norwegian law to stipulate the relationship of national acts with international obligations. We spelled out that the law should be applied in compliance with international obligations for the protection of the rights of persons with disabilities, CRPD in particular. If the law or if the convention, the CRPD, becomes incorporated into Norwegian law, this would not be a problem, but as it remains unincorporated, this is an issue. Section 3 provides some fundamental principles. The principles presented just now by the Finnish delegate were excellent. I will certainly take them further, but in this draft, we simply pointed to the prohibition against deprivation of legal capacity as a fundamental principle, that no one should be deprived of their legal capacity. That everybody should have access to supported decision-making on a voluntary basis, regardless of the extent of their needs for the support in the decision-making. So no proportionality limitation. Section 4 is about terminology, not necessary to rehearse here. Section 5 of this draft act would concern the commencement of a process of supported decision-making based on the person's request for support in their decision-making. We included a safety net about relatives of a person being able to request supported decision-making unless this would be assumed to be against the decision-maker's own wishes. But simply trying to spell out a process for formally starting supported decision-making. Section 6 would be about spelling out explicit and implicit expressions of will, trying to counter the
moderator here. Could you kindly wrap it up? Thank you.
Yes, I was on 8 minutes, but that's fine. Explicit and implicit expression of will, everybody knows this is a continuous counter-argument against supported decision-making, trying to counter that in the Act. Section 7 would concern who will be appointed as decision supporters, that it should also be voluntary based on the person's own wishes. Section 8, importantly, would be about the content of supported decision-making, where we included every decision in the person's life, also everyday choices that appears to be excluded from the Finnish new legislation. But always with the aim of supporting the decision maker and allow them to reach decisions in line with their interests and decisions with the person and not for the persons. Section 9 would be about interpreting the person's will if that is ambiguous. But in light of the time and the moderator's request, I skipped the rest. This draft is available from Uluba if anybody wants to read it. It's not a perfect draft. It was meant to create a discussion in the Norwegian legal community and inspire the government to further processes towards supported decision-making in lieu of substituted decision-making. I'll leave it at that, and thank you for your